The millionaire sat in the wrong lounge, and the singer he met changed everything. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The sound of jazz floated through the dimly lit lounge in downtown Chicago. Glasses clinked softly. A low hum of conversation rolled beneath the melody of a live piano, and warm golden light reflected off the rain-slick windows. The kind of place where people came to disappear into music and memory. Grace Walker stood beneath the small spotlight at the corner stage, holding a vintage microphone close to her lips. Her voice was smoky, tender, and a little tired, like someone who had learned to turn heartbreak into rhythm. She sang Moon River, her favorite song since childhood. The audience listened quietly, the kind of silence that said they felt something but did not know how to name it. At that same moment, the heavy door opened, letting in a burst of cold Chicago air and a tall man in a gray overcoat. His name was Lucas Reed, 33 years old, a self-made millionaire known for buying struggling art galleries and turning them into gold. He was supposed to meet a business partner at Velvet Lounge across the street, but had walked into Velvet Note instead. He looked around, confused for a second, then decided to stay. Something about the music made him forget to leave. He took a seat near the stage, loosened his tie, and ordered a whiskey neat. When he lifted his eyes, Grace was looking right at him. Their gazes met under the amber light. And for a moment the world outside, the rain, the noise, the deadlines faded away. When her song ended, he was the first to clap. She smiled nervously, surprised someone in a designer suit would even notice her. She stepped down from the stage, clutching a small lyric card she had written earlier, and approached him. "Hi," she said softly, trying to sound confident. "You must be from the label, right?" Jenny said a producer might come tonight. Lucas hesitated. He was about to correct her, to tell her he was not who she thought, but something in her eyes, hopeful, fragile, stopped him. He smiled instead. "Right, the label." Grace let out a breath of relief. "I was so nervous. Thank you for staying through my set." She handed him the small card with neat handwriting that read, "If you ever find your way back here, sing along." Lucas looked down at it, his lips curving slightly. "I will keep that in mind." As she walked away, he watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear before stepping back into the light. The piano started again, and her voice rose over the hum of the bar. For reasons he could not explain, Lucas stayed until the last note faded. Outside, the rain was still falling. He slipped the lyric card into his coat pocket, unaware that a simple mistake, a wrong door on a rainy night, had just changed everything. The rain kept falling outside the Velvet Note when Grace finished her second set. She packed her small notebook of lyrics, tucked the microphone cable neatly, and slipped into her faded denim jacket. The warmth of the room faded as soon as she stepped into the night. The streets of downtown Chicago shimmered under the streetlights, puddles reflecting neon signs and the silhouettes of people hurrying home. Her apartment was a small basement studio in Wicker Park, with one window facing a brick wall. The radiator clanged unevenly, and the sound of the L train rumbled in the distance. Grace dropped her bag by the door and collapsed on her second-hand couch. Her hands were cold, and the faint scent of smoke and rain clung to her hair. She took out the lyric card duplicates she often made for fans. But tonight she looked at the blank one left on top of the stack. Her eyes softened. That man, Lucas, had listened the whole night without checking his phone once. Grace turned on her small speaker and replayed a rough demo of her own song, scribbling new notes in the margin. The rhythm was uneven, but it carried something she liked: hope, mixed with sadness. She wrote down a title in blue ink: Wrong Door, Right Heart. Across the city, in a high-rise apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, Lucas Reed poured himself another whiskey. The city glowed beneath him, cars crawling through wet streets, horns echoing faintly through glass. His penthouse was filled with expensive furniture and rare art pieces, yet it felt cold. He loosened his tie and reached into his coat pocket. The small lyric card she had given him was still there, damp at the edges but legible. He read the line again. "If you ever find your way back here, sing along." He smiled slightly, the first genuine smile he had worn in weeks. Most people he met wanted deals, introductions, or influence. Grace had looked at him like he was just another stranger in the crowd. For a man who built empires out of calculated risks, that feeling of being ordinary had felt almost peaceful. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. A message from her friend and roommate, Tessa. The cafe called. "Can you cover the morning shift?" Grace groaned softly but said yes. She needed every dollar. After a quick shower, she pulled her hair into a bun and walked to the corner cafe where she worked part-time. The bell over the door jingled as she entered, and the smell of coffee and pastries filled the air. She tied her apron, forced a smile, and started the first order. The routine was comforting. Pour, serve, wipe, repeat. Around mid-morning, she looked up and froze. Through the glass window, parked across the street, was a familiar gray car. The same man from last night stepped out, his hair slightly messy, a scarf around his neck. He looked different in daylight, less like a mysterious stranger, and more like someone who did not belong in a regular coffee line. Grace blinked, uncertain if he would recognize her. But when their eyes met, Lucas gave a small nod and walked in. "Good morning," he said, his tone polite but warm. "Black coffee, please." She swallowed, hiding her surprise. "Coming right up." He studied the menu board, then the walls filled with local art. "Do they ever play live music here?" he asked. "Sometimes on weekends," Grace said, placing the cup on the counter. "Small crowd, nothing fancy." Lucas nodded thoughtfully, taking the first sip. "I like small crowds." She smiled despite herself. "You found your way back, I see." "Bye." He lifted his cup slightly, eyes amused. "Told you I would." As he turned to leave, he placed a business card on the counter. "If you ever need a bigger stage, Miss Walker, call me." When he left, the tiny brass bell above the door chimed again, and Grace stood still, her heart pounding faster than she wanted to admit. She looked down at the card, Lucas Reed, Reed Capital, Chicago. The name sounded familiar. She could not place it, but she felt a spark of curiosity that would not fade. She tucked the card into her apron pocket, not realizing that the man who had walked out was far more than he appeared, and that their story had only just begun. That night, the rain returned to Chicago, tapping gently against the single small window of Grace's basement apartment. She sat on her worn couch with a mug of instant coffee, and her old notebook spread open on her lap. Between pages of scribbled lyrics, the business card lay like a secret. Lucas Reed. Reed Capital. The name kept circling in her mind. She did not know why, but something about him felt unfinished, like a song that had not reached its final note. She opened her laptop and searched the name out of curiosity. The results made her eyes widen. Articles, interviews, and headlines filled the screen. Tech investor turns art patron. Chicago's youngest millionaire expands foundation for the arts. The photographs showed the same man from the Velvet Note, but this time in tailored suits beside politicians and artists. Grace leaned back slowly, her chest tightening. The man who had walked into her small world by mistake was a millionaire. She laughed softly, half in disbelief, half in embarrassment. "Well, that figures," she whispered to herself. Of course he was. She thought of the lyric card she had given him, and covered her face with her hands. "Oh, Grace, you talked to him like he was a scout from a record label." Still, the thought of him returning to her cafe the next morning, speaking to her kindly, made her cheeks warm. He had not acted superior. He had looked at her the same way he had at the lounge, like her voice mattered. She closed her notebook, decided to sleep, and told herself that she would never see him again. But fate had other plans. 2 weeks later, Grace received an unexpected phone call from an event organizer. They had found her through a friend at the Velvet Note and wanted her to perform at a charity gala hosted by a major art foundation. The event was formal, elegant, and paid more than she had ever earned in one night. She accepted immediately. On the night of the gala, she stood behind the stage curtain at the Palmer House Hotel, adjusting the strap of her long black dress. The chandeliers glowed above a sea of people in evening wear. A jazz trio tuned their instruments nearby. Her palms were sweating. She whispered under her breath, "You can do this, Grace." One song at a time. When she walked on stage, the applause was polite. The lights were blinding, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw him, Lucas Reed, sitting at the front table, dressed in a charcoal suit. For a moment, the rest of the room disappeared. Her voice trembled at first, but then it steadied as the music carried her. She sang her original song, "Wrong Door," Right Heart. The lyrics told a story about walking into the wrong place and finding the right person. As she sang the final note, the audience stood and clapped. Grace smiled, heart racing, unaware that the man who had inspired the song was watching with a look she could not yet read. After the performance, she slipped backstage, her hands shaking from adrenaline. She did not expect to see Lucas waiting by the side entrance, his expression warm but unsure. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "You wrote that, did you not?" She nodded. "It was just a little song I was working on." "It did not sound little to me," he replied, his tone sincere. "Would you like to visit my gallery tomorrow? I think your music belongs in more than one room." Grace hesitated. "I am not really the gallery type, Mr. Reed." He smiled faintly. "Neither am I most days, but maybe that is why it could be interesting." 9. The next day, she found herself standing inside the Reed Foundation's private gallery on Michigan Avenue. The walls were lined with modern art and soft jazz played in the background. Lucas guided her through the rooms, stopping in front of a painting that looked like ripples of light on water. "My mother used to say," he told her, "that art is not about showing beauty, it is about reminding people they are still alive." Grace looked at the painting, then at him. "Your mother sounds like she was wise." "She was a singer," he said simply. Grace froze. "A singer?" He nodded. "She used to perform in small lounges, just like you. She passed away a few years ago. I think that is why your voice caught me off guard that night. It sounded familiar." The words lingered between them, soft but heavy. Grace felt something stir in her chest, understanding, maybe even compassion. For the first time, she saw more than wealth in him. She saw loneliness. When she left the gallery that evening, Lucas walked her to the door. The city lights reflected off the glass, and he said quietly, "Thank you for reminding me what music feels like." Grace smiled. "Thank you for listening." As she stepped into the cool night air, she glanced back once more. He was still standing there, watching her go, his reflection merging with hers in the glass door, two lives that were never meant to cross, now tied by one accidental meeting. And neither of them could tell yet. But that mistake had just become the beginning of everything. The following weeks passed quietly. But something in Grace's life began to shift. Every few days, a small envelope arrived at the cafe invitation, a thank you note, or a handwritten message from the Reed Foundation. Lucas never mentioned his wealth or the world he belonged to. He only asked if she would come sing at small gatherings or art showcases he sponsored around the city. Grace accepted each time, partly because she needed the income, but mostly because she wanted to see him again. Each event felt different when he was there. He never sat in the center or drew attention to himself. Instead, he would stand near the back, listening, eyes fixed on her as if every note she sang held meaning only for him. Between sets, they talked about ordinary things, music, books, the city skyline. He told her how he walked along the river when he needed to think, and she told him how the sound of trains at night helped her sleep. One evening, after a late performance, Lucas offered to drive her home. The air was cold, and the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. Inside his car, the silence was gentle, not uncomfortable. Grace watched the passing streets and said softly, "It feels strange, you know, singing in rooms full of people who live in a different world." "Versen," Lucas glanced at her. "You belong there more than you think." She smiled faintly. "You say that because you are kind." "I say it because it is true," he replied, his voice low. When they reached her building, she hesitated before opening the door. "Thank you, for the rides, for the shows, for everything." He shook his head slightly. "Do not thank me. You remind me of why I started all this in the first place." Their eyes met for a long moment before she stepped out. The wind caught her hair as she turned back toward him. "Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Grace," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Days later, Grace's phone buzzed with another message, this time from the event director of the foundation. "Formal gala next Friday. Reed will be there. You are the guest performer." She felt both excited and nervous. It was the largest stage she had ever been offered. That Friday, the ballroom glowed with golden light. Waiters carried trays of champagne as guests in designer gowns filled the space. Grace stood backstage, breathing deeply. The host announced the night's special segment, Celebrating Art and Kindness, brought to you by the Reed Foundation. Then the spotlight shifted, and the audience applauded as the host continued. "Please welcome our founder, Mr. Lucas Reed." Grace froze. The sound of clapping blurred in her ears. She stepped forward just enough to see him on stage, shaking hands with donors, smiling under the lights. The realization struck her hard. This was his world, and she had never really seen it. Her throat tightened. Every conversation, every moment they had shared replayed in her mind with a different meaning. He had known she did not understand who he was, and he had said nothing. When the lights dimmed for her set, she forced herself to walk on stage. The first note trembled, the next came steady, but her heart was no longer in the song. From the corner of her eye, she saw him watching, concern flickering across his face. When it ended, she bowed quickly and left before anyone could stop her. She walked fast through the hallway, heels echoing against marble floors. Behind her, she heard his voice calling, "Grace, wait." She turned, eyes bright with anger and disbelief. "You let me think you were someone else. I'll look too. I wanted you to know me without the noise," he said, breathless. "Without all this. You should have told me," she said quietly. "Because now, I do not know what was real." She walked away, leaving him standing in the glow of chandeliers that suddenly felt too bright. Outside, the night wind off Lake Michigan cut through the city, and somewhere in the distance, a lone saxophone played a melody about trust, loss, and the kind of mistake that still hurts when it comes from the right heart. For days after the gala, Grace avoided every call that came from unfamiliar numbers. She turned off her phone each night, trying to drown her thoughts in music. But even the songs felt different now. The sound of her own voice reminded her of that night. The crowd, the lights, the way Lucas had looked at her when she realized who he really was. The Velvet Note, once her safe place, felt too quiet. The regulars noticed her silence, but no one asked. When she sang now, her voice carried something deeper, a sadness that even the bartender whispered about. Between sets, she stared at the doorway, as if expecting him to appear, but he never did. Lucas, meanwhile, sat alone in his office overlooking the city. The skyline blurred beyond the glass, its lights reflecting off the whiskey in his hand. He had tried to reach her through the foundation, through mutual friends, even through the caf, but every attempt ended in silence. He replayed their last conversation over and over, wishing he had told her sooner, wishing he had trusted her with the truth. One evening, he visited the Velvet Note. The lights were dim, the tables half empty. Grace was on stage, singing a quiet version of "At Last." Her eyes were closed, her voice trembling with something raw. He stood at the back, unseen, listening until the last note faded. When she opened her eyes, their gazes met across the room. She froze. The microphone trembled in her hand. The crowd began to applaud, unaware of what was happening between them. She gave a small nod of thanks and left the stage quickly, slipping into the hallway behind the bar. Lucas followed, stopping a few steps behind her. "Grace," he said softly. She turned. "Why are you here?" "Because I owe you the truth," he said, "and maybe an apology that words cannot fix." She crossed her arms, trying to steady herself. "You had plenty of chances. Tau?" "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if you knew who I was, everything between us would change. I wanted to be seen for something other than my money." Her expression softened, but only slightly. "And what about me? I trusted what I saw." "You took that away." "I never meant to," he said. "You were the first person in years who made me feel human again." Silence filled the hallway. Outside, the sound of traffic mixed with the faint rhythm of the jazz band starting another song. Grace looked down, her voice quieter. "You cannot just walk in here and expect it to go back to the way it was." "I am not asking for that," Lucas said. "I only ask for one more chance to show you who I really am. No stage lights, no suits, no lies, just us." She hesitated, torn between pride and the part of her that still remembered the way he had listened, not for profit but for meaning. Finally, she said, "If I say yes, and you hurt me again, I will never forgive you." He nodded. "Fair." "Hooray." Grace exhaled slowly, the anger in her eyes fading into exhaustion. "One chance," she said quietly. Lucas's shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. "That is all I need." As she walked past him toward the stage, he caught the faintest trace of her perfume, the same scent from the night they met. He looked at the empty tables and thought of how strange fate could be, how a wrong turn on a rainy night could lead him to the only person who made him feel right. And as the music began again, Grace took the microphone, her eyes finding him across the crowd. She sang with a steadier voice this time. every note carrying both forgiveness and warning. Lucas listened, knowing this was not an ending but the fragile beginning of something worth fighting for. Over the next several weeks, Grace and Lucas began to meet again, carefully, quietly, away from the noise of the city. It was not the same as before. There were no expensive restaurants or lavish events. He met her after her sets at the Velvet Note, sometimes helping her carry her keyboard to the car, sometimes just walking beside her under the cold Chicago sky. Their conversations were simpler now. He talked about his mother's songs and the way her voice used to calm him as a child. She told him about her mother's illness and how she sang every night to pay for treatment. One evening, Grace found herself at the Reed Foundation office. The sun was setting over Lake Michigan, and the glass walls glowed orange. Lucas was preparing a new project, one meant to sponsor independent musicians across the city. "You inspired this," he said as he handed her the proposal. "Your voice reminded me of how many artists never get the chance they deserve." Grace looked at the document, then at him. "You did not have to do this for me." "I did not," he replied. "I am doing it because of you." The simplicity of his words made her heart ache. She wanted to believe him, but doubt still lingered. That night, when she left his office, Lucas stayed behind. Alone under the city lights, he made a decision. If he wanted her trust, he needed to prove it through actions, not promises. 2 weeks later, Grace arrived at the Velvet Note to find the place buzzing with quiet excitement. The owner met her at the door. "You might want to look inside," he said with a grin. She stepped in and froze. The dim lounge had been completely transformed. The walls were repainted, the lights newly installed, and at the center of the small stage stood a brand new piano with her name engraved on the side. Grace Walker Edition. At the bar, Lucas stood waiting. "I bought the club," he said softly, "but not to own it to give it back. This will be the first Reed Foundation artist space. Every performer who starts here will get paid fairly. No contracts, no fine print, just music." Grace looked around in disbelief. "You did all this for me." He smiled. "For what you stand for." Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "You did not have to fix my world, Lucas." "I did not fix it," he said. "You did. I just wanted to make sure it had a stage." The music began as the first band of the night started to play. The soft rhythm of a saxophone filled the air. Grace turned to him. "You never stop surprising me." "I am only trying to make up for one mistake," he said. "The one where I let you walk away." Sixta. She took a step closer, the golden light catching the tears at the corners of her eyes. "Maybe some mistakes are meant to happen," she said quietly. He nodded. "Maybe they are." They stood there, surrounded by the hum of conversation and the warmth of the lights, as the piano notes carried softly through the room. For the first time since they met, there was no misunderstanding between them. No pretense, no secrets. Grace smiled faintly. "You really are something else, Lucas Reed." "Tada." He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "So are you, Grace Walker." And as the music rose, the camera of life seemed to pull back, leaving them standing in the glow of the place that had once been their mistake and had now become their beginning. Outside, the rain had stopped, and Chicago shimmered in peace. For a while, everything felt almost perfect. Grace's performances at the newly renovated Velvet Note drew larger crowds each weekend. Her voice carried a new kind of warmth, and people noticed. The press began to write small features about the Reed Foundation's hidden jazz gem and the woman whose songs could quiet a noisy room. Lucas attended every show he could, sometimes staying in the back, other times joining the staff to help rearrange chairs or adjust lights. He seemed happier there than in his own office tower. Grace was beginning to believe that maybe, this time, things would last. But peace rarely stays long. One morning, while Grace was rehearsing, her phone lit up with dozens of messages. Headlines appeared everywhere. Millionaire Lucas Reed accused of nepotism. Singer's career tied to secret relationship with foundation founder. Someone had leaked photos of them together and twisted the story into something ugly. At first, she refused to believe it mattered. People talk, she told herself. But by evening, sponsors began to cancel appearances, and her upcoming feature was quietly withdrawn. When she walked into the Velvet Note that night, the manager's expression told her everything. "Grace, the board wants to pause the partnership until the press settles down," he said regretfully. "It is not your fault, but they cannot risk bad publicity." Grace nodded numbly, unable to speak. Across town, Lucas faced the same storm. His board of investors demanded explanations. They accused him of using company funds for personal gain. "This is not about love," one of them sneered. "It is about reputation. You built your brand on credibility, and now it looks compromised." Lucas slammed the report shut. "I built my brand on truth. If you think I'm going to deny someone's talent just to protect a headline, you are mistaken." The room fell silent, but the damage was already spreading. That night, Grace found him waiting outside her apartment. He looked exhausted, the light rain soaking his coat. "I am so sorry," he said quietly. "Someone from the foundation leaked it. I am trying to fix it." She folded her arms, hurt flickering behind her eyes. "You should not have to fix anything, Lucas. You tried to help me. And now everyone thinks I used you." "That is not true," he said. "We know it is not true. But the world does not," she whispered. "And that is enough to ruin everything I have worked for." He stepped closer. "Let me protect you." She shook her head. "You cannot protect me from whispers. I need to stand on my own, or it will never mean anything." "RY." Lucas wanted to argue, but the conviction in her voice stopped him. She was right. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the lyric card she had given him months ago, and handed it to her. "Keep it," he said. "It started with your words. Let it end with them if it has to." Grace stared at the card, her chest tight. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that maybe love means letting the other person fight their own battles," he said softly. "Even if it breaks your heart." "WF." She looked up at him, rain streaking down her cheeks like tears. "Then I guess we both know what comes next." Lucas nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "You deserve the world, Grace. I just hope the world deserves you back." When he walked away into the rain, she did not call him back. The city lights blurred in the downpour, and the familiar rhythm of Chicago traffic filled the silence. For the first time since that night they met, the wrong door had closed, and she did not know if it would ever open again. Weeks passed. The story faded from the headlines, but the silence between Grace and Lucas remained. The Velvet Note went back to hosting small performances, though it never felt the same. Grace still sang, but her songs carried a sadness that audiences could feel. She avoided the foundation, avoided the news, and tried to live as if nothing had happened. But every time she saw a gray coat in a crowd, her chest tightened, hoping for a face she no longer expected to see. One gray afternoon, Grace received a message from the owner of the lounge. "You should come tonight," it said simply. "There is something you need to see." She almost ignored it. She had promised herself she would not get caught in anything that had his name on it again. But something about the tone of the message, gentle, familiar, made her curious. So that evening, she walked the familiar streets of downtown Chicago, her scarf pulled tight against the wind. When she stepped inside, the lights were dimmed, the tables full, and soft music played through hidden speakers. A banner stretched across the stage, "The Art of Grace Walker." She froze. Around the room hung framed photographs from her performances, newspaper clippings, and handwritten lyrics blown up in gold frames. At the center stood the piano he had given her, polished and shining under a single spotlight. Then she saw him. Lucas stood near the back, in a simple dark suit, hands clasped nervously. When their eyes met, he stepped forward slowly. "I promised you a stage that was yours," he said softly. "So I built it." Grace could barely find her voice. "You did all this?" He nodded. "Not for show. For you. For every artist who thought they were not enough. You said you wanted to stand on your own, so I made sure this night belonged to you alone. No Reed Foundation banners, no logos, no press, just your name." The crowd began to applaud gently, as if sensing what this moment meant. Grace turned in a slow circle, taking in the sight of her journey reflected on every wall. The tears she had been holding back for weeks finally slipped free. Lucas reached into his pocket and unfolded the lyric card, the same one she had written on that first night. "You told me to sing along if I ever found my way back," he said, his voice trembling just slightly. "I finally did." She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. "You are impossible." "Maybe," he said. "But I was not going to let our story end in silence." Grace stepped closer until she was standing in front of him, the lights casting a soft glow over both of them. "You did not have to prove anything to me, Lucas." "I did not do it to prove anything," he replied. "I did it because you reminded me of who I was before money and titles made me forget." She looked at him for a long moment, then reached for the microphone on the piano. Then maybe it is time for both of us to start over. The room went still. She began to sing a new song, one no one had ever heard before, gentle, steady, full of light. The melody wrapped around them like a promise. Lucas watched her, his expression soft and unguarded. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause. Grace lowered the microphone and turned to him with a quiet smile. "Maybe the wrong door was never wrong at all," she said. Lucas smiled back. "Maybe it just led us here." And in that moment, surrounded by music, forgiveness, and the city that had brought them together by mistake, they finally understood that some wrong turns are the ones that bring you home. Spring sunlight spilled through the windows of the Velvet Note, warming the polished piano that now stood at the heart of the stage. Months had passed since that night of redemption, and the small lounge had become one of Chicago's most beloved spots. Grace's voice had drawn people from all over the city. What once began as a quiet refuge for a struggling singer had turned into a place filled with laughter, jazz, and stories of second chances. Tonight, however, felt different. The marquee outside read, "Grace Walker and Lucas Reed, Private Celebration." Inside, the tables were covered with white lilies, the same flowers that had decorated the first concert she ever sang for the Reed Foundation. The soft murmur of conversation faded as Grace stepped out from behind the curtain. Her dress shimmered like a silver melody, and a calm joy filled her face. "Good evening, everyone," she said with a smile. "Thank you for being here. This place means more to me than any record deal ever could. It is where I learned that sometimes mistakes are just miracles in disguise." The crowd chuckled softly, and someone shouted, "Sing us the song that started it all." Grace turned toward the piano, her fingers tracing the gold letters carved into the side, Grace Walker Edition. She sat down and began to play the first chords of Wrong Door, Right Heart. The room grew still. Her voice rose, smooth and full of life, carrying the memory of every moment that had brought her here. The rainy night, the misunderstanding, the heartbreak, and the forgiveness. When the last note faded, she looked up and found Lucas standing near the doorway. He was not in a suit this time, only a white shirt and his familiar gray coat. He smiled, the same quiet smile that had changed everything. As the audience applauded, he walked toward the stage, carrying a single white envelope. "I have one more gift for you," he said softly. "It is not flowers or jewelry. It is a deed. The Velvet Note is now yours." Grace blinked in disbelief. "Mine?" He nodded. "You gave this place its soul. It should belong to you." Her eyes filled with tears, and her hands trembled as she took the envelope. "Lucas, I do not know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply. She laughed, half crying, half smiling. "You never stop surprising me." He reached for her hand, his tone warm. "I just wanted you to have a place where your music can live forever. And maybe, if you will allow it, a place where we can begin again." The audience watched in silence as Grace stood, her hand still in his. She whispered, "Yes, Lucas Reed. 1,000 times yes." Applause filled the room, but they hardly heard it. They stood together on the stage where their story had begun, surrounded by the music that had bound them from the start. Outside, the evening lights of Chicago shimmered on the river, reflecting gold across the windows. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "you really did walk into the wrong place that night." He smiled. "And I have never been more grateful for a mistake." She looked up at him, her voice a whisper. "The best mistake we ever made. Do." As the piano played the closing notes and the city hummed beyond the glass, their laughter blended with the melody, two hearts finally at peace, proving that love, when it is real, always finds its way home.